And so, so we're not going to focus so much on those. We're going to focus instead on just the literary references for non-thematic metaphoric comparison, since those are used a little bit less often, and I think those benefit a little bit more from discussion. So the characteristics, basically, to just sort of sum up the reading for literary references for non-thematic metaphoric comparison, is that it uses a literary reference for the comparison, that the comparison is metaphoric, that it's not a literal comparison, and that it's not a major work of the theme, not a major theme of the literary work or of your document or your argument. The functions of non-thematic literary metaphor are, first of all, to demonstrate some shared knowledge, basically, to use a shared body of knowledge, a shared knowledge of literary references, or maybe even, this can even apply to movie references or even cultural references like commercials or television shows. And it's to use this shared knowledge as a sort of shorthand. And so one of the examples that you saw in the book was the reference and the opinion to the trail that the defendant left of stolen goods compared to the trail of Hansel and Gretel. And so it takes something that we're not as familiar with, a set of facts or an issue, and just like metaphor does in general terms, it ties it to something that's more concrete that we're more familiar with. It also enhances your logos, your pathos, and your ethos. How do you guys, how would you explain that? How does it enhance, first of all, your logos? How does it make your argument more logical, or your facts more logical? Yeah, Loretta?
It makes your argument easier for the reader to understand because you're using shared knowledge, something easy for him to relate to.
Yeah, and so it gives it a structure that it might not otherwise have. So rather than having to build the structure or provide the structure, the literary metaphor provides the structure, thus enhancing the logos. The next question, obviously, is then how does it enhance the ethos? Nikki?
I was actually lingering from the first question that I had my hand up, but I'll take a crack at it. I guess it's sort of the same thing. It's already established, so it's easier for the reader to connect to what you're saying in the argument. And because I'm thinking maybe because you're using something that might be known to them already, that you kind of are getting a little freebie on the credibility, sort of. Is that?
Yeah, so one way that it enhances your credibility is that you demonstrate that you have a shared body of knowledge that the reader has.
Right.
And so, yeah, and so in that way, it enhances your credibility, because anything you do that makes you more relatable to the reader makes you more credible to the reader. If I know what you know, then I'm like you, and you can trust what I have to say. What's another way that it enhances ethos? Marilyn?
It shows that you're creative, and that you're well-read, you know your literature, and yeah, increase your credibility that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So it demonstrates that you are an educated, well-read person, that you're familiar with the common literature that we're generally familiar with as a result of having been educated in a similar system. How does it increase your pathos? Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Maybe the literary reference that you have may draw memories or trigger some sort of emotion that may bring out in the reader.
Yeah, so it may bring out positive emotions related to the reference itself. That's one way it could. What's another way? Remember, there are a lot of aspects to pathos, and so one is the positive emotion that you generate in the reader about the writing itself, and so that's what Ryan's talking about. But there are other types of there are other aspects of pathos that this brings up. Yeah, Ryan?
It sets the mood, right? Because you have medium mood control.
Exactly. So it helps you with medium mood control, potentially. That, for example, if it's a humorous reference, you may evoke that humor, which is generally considered to be a positive emotion. So you can use it for medium mood control, where not just the content of the message is the message, but also the way of conveying the message is part of the message itself. So that's medium mood control. Another way that it conveys pathos is one that you guys all touched on when you responded about ethos and logos, and that is that it makes your whatever point you're trying to make, it makes it more relatable. And anything that makes your point or your document more relatable improves pathos. Because remember, pathos isn't just about eliciting positive emotion for the document, but it's also about eliciting a connection between you. And remember, we talked a lot at the beginning about that, about the audience-author relationship, and that pathos, evoking pathos, has a lot to do, or pathos is generated in a significant way through creating positive feelings about you as the author by your audience as the reader. And so these shared references also create pathos. They create a relationship. They indicate similarities to you and your reader. They also indicate that you have some understanding of the reader's task, and that you're trying to make the reader's task more interesting or more entertaining, or both. So it impacts that. So you get a lot of bang for your buck persuasively out of effective, I want to be clear about that, about effective literary references. A couple of cautions about literary references. Obviously, because they work from shared knowledge, they can't be obscure. If they're obscure literary references, they don't work. And I'll give you an example. I got an appellate brief years ago from a student that had this reference to a line out of a movie. And I know it was a line out of a movie because the metaphor, the reference said, this is like the line from the famous movie, "Show me your papers." Anybody know what movie that is? Yeah, I had no clue. I had no clue. Now, I am a huge movie buff. Old movies, new movies, good movies, bad movies. My family has a penchant for really bad, horrible movies. And so I watch a lot of movies, and I'm familiar with a lot of movies. I had no idea what that was from. So when the student came in, inevitably to complain that the grade did not reflect his genius, we talked about that metaphor. And I said, "What is that? I don't even know what this is." And he looked at me and he said, "Casablanca." And I said, "Where?" And he said, "When the Nazis come in and they say, 'Papers, show me your papers.'" And I said, in a million years, I'd have never gotten that. And I said, Casablanca, I said, if you're going to use a reference from Casablanca, it's going to be, "Here's looking at you, kid. Of all the gin joints in all the world, play it again." Like, there are a lot of references you could pull from Casablanca, and that's just not one of them. So it can't be obscure. It can't be either an obscure literary work, and it can't be an obscure reference within the literary work. It fails for that reason. And what's interesting is he said to me what I think a lot of writers feel, which is, he said, "But you should know that." And I said, "Yeah, but it failed because I don't." and because you didn't predict that I didn't. And so as the writer, as the reader, I'm in the position of being able to say, oh, it didn't work because I say it didn't work. And so it's not the author that ultimately gets to decide whether something works. It's the reader that says it didn't work. I'll give you another example of that. In Top Chef, or really in any cooking show at all, when somebody loses, inevitably a loser will say, I don't care what they say, that dish was good. Well, no, if the person eating it said it was not good, it's not good. It's not good. It doesn't matter how good you are at creating it. And it's the same with writing. It doesn't matter how good you are at creating it. If the reader doesn't get it, the reader doesn't get it. And then finally, overuse, using too many metaphors. Literary metaphors, like original metaphors, like established metaphors, are most effective when they are used very sparingly, very judiciously. So you don't want to overuse them. At some point, they become tiresome, and the document sort of becomes all about the cleverness of the writer rather than about helping the reader understand something. So what I'd like you to do at this point is I'm going to put you into random groups, not your same groups. I'm putting you into random groups, and I'd like you to discuss one of the metaphors in exercise 11.1. It's on page 255 of the text. And the metaphors are on pages 254 and 255. And so groups, how am I going to do that? This would have worked perfectly if I were putting in your regular groups, but I'm not. Okay, so I'm going to divide you in groups, and I'll pop in for just a second and tell you which metaphor you're looking at.
Professor Norton?
Yes?
My computer decided to just like stop working, so I reconnected on my phone. Am I still able to get into a group on a phone?
I think you should. I don't think you should have any trouble with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you'll be fine.
Thanks.
And if you're not, it was nice seeing you. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, you should be able to go in now. Okay, we're still missing 2 people. Let's go ahead and get started though. So for the group that had 11.4, so for each of these, we're going to ask 3 questions. One is, what is the comparison? The second is it a metaphoric comparison? And is it non-thematic? Because we're looking at non-thematic metaphors for comparison, so we want to evaluate each of those pieces. So for the group that had 11.4, first of all, tell us what your, oh, actually, I think it'll be faster this way. Everybody take a few minutes and read through the example in 11.4, and then we'll let them walk us through it. Okay, so someone within the group, tell us, what is the comparison specifically?
The comparison is Gulliver's Travel. It's a
Okay. No, you're right. You're right.
And what, do you want me to elaborate on that? Because I don't really know much about it.
Right. So what is the, well, let me ask you this first. What is Gulliver's Travels about?
His travels. He's on a boat, and he lands on this island, and then they more or less capture him and hold him hostage as a prisoner.
There you go. So, and of course, he is a regular sized person.
And they are these little people.
And they are really tiny people.
Right.
Okay. So that's the comparison is between this court and Gulliver and Gulliver's Travels. Is this a metaphoric comparison?
We said no.
Okay.
Oh wait, no, metaphoric. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, we
Okay.
did metaphoric, because there's no like or as or anything else that explicitly states a simile.
Okay. And then what is it that makes it metaphoric? What is it that makes it figurative rather than literal?
The courts are being held down basically by the attorneys and all the paperwork. No?
But what makes that what was?
Well, they're not, it's not, well, there was a couple.
What is it that makes that a figurative comparison rather than a literal comparison?
Oh,
Pardon me?
Tag, you're it?
Yeah, you were in a group with 3 other people.
Someone else?
Yeah, I
can-
know.
Oh yeah, somebody else can jump in if you want.
You want me to answer, Lorraine?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I think we talked about that the courts are not literally being held down by little people.
Right.
Yeah, something like that.
Right. They're not literally being held down by tiny lawyers who have strapped them down with what are to the Lilliputians large ropes, but to Gulliver tiny little wisps. And so that's what makes it figurative rather than literal. I want you to start noticing when somebody says something, when somebody uses the word literally, because what you'll notice is that when most people say literally, they mean emphatically, or they mean almost, or they don't mean literally. Literally means actually in reality. Figuratively means as if. So the one that kills me is when somebody says, I am literally dying. No, you're not literally dying. First of all, people who are literally dying usually don't say I'm literally dying. They usually say I'm dying because they're asking for help. So when somebody says, I'm literally starving. No, probably not. You're figuratively starving. You're exaggerating. You're using hyperbole, which is an effective device, but it's not literal. So this is figurative rather than literal because he's not actually being held down by little people. So that's what makes it a metaphor. The next thing is it, and one thing, part of this is actually a simile rather than a metaphor. So the comparison, it says, this endless and utterly pointless paper trail makes this extraordinarily busy court feel like Gulliver. So that is a simile. That is a simile. Okay. And how is it non-thematic?
Well, because it doesn't refer to the case itself. It's only referring to a part of it. I'm sorry that I'm crooked. I'm trying to get this reception.
Yeah, it's an aspect of Gulliver. Like the main point of Gulliver wasn't, him being pulled down. And that certainly wasn't the theme of Gulliver. There was a theme of Gulliver's Travels, and it wasn't just that one part of it. And so it's non-thematic in that it doesn't address the theme of the work, Gulliver's Travels, and it's not the main theme of the court's opinion. It's just part of the court's opinion. So that's what makes it non-thematic. Do you guys think it was effective? You weren't asked to deal with this question, but do you think it was effective?
Okay. No, because we had no clue what it was until we looked it up.
I thought it was, but.
Oh, you thought it was?
Go ahead, Lorraine, go ahead.
Well, I thought it was once we looked it up and understood it, but we were also discussing the glacier thrown in there too, because that kind of helped us a little bit understand it better, because when the glacial pace.
Yeah, and saying glacial, that's a metaphor also. Yeah. It's sort of an incidental metaphor, but it's a non-thematic metaphor. It just, the glacial one doesn't happen to be a literary reference. So yeah, so you and Marilyn are making the point that without understanding Gulliver's Travels, it's not really a very effective metaphor. I would argue, but this is like, me saying to the person eating the dish, no, but you don't understand. It's a really good dish. And you going, yeah, it didn't taste good. I don't like it. Mm-hmm. So like, it doesn't matter. Like as a reader, it doesn't matter if your palate does not experience this in a positive way. It really doesn't matter how good I think it is as an outside observer. And so I do think it's a good metaphor, but that's because I've read Gulliver's Travels. Mm-hmm. And so if you haven't read Gulliver's Travels, that is problematic. And so I have to say that and this isn't super recent, like this, our education system goes through these things where we're more focused on skills or more focused on knowledge, and it, it swings back and forth. And so, right now, for example, the emphasis, I know this because I have kids in middle school and high school, the emphasis is really more on skill. That's what the whole Common Core thing is about. It's that the emphasis is on skills rather than a body of knowledge. And you can argue about whether that's a good or a bad thing. I don't think it's good or bad. I just think it's where we are right now. In the past, we have emphasized a base of knowledge. So when I was going through elementary, middle school, and high school, the emphasis was on acquiring a body of knowledge, on graduating from high school with a body of knowledge that we call generally what educated people know. And educated just meant high school, what people coming out of high school. So, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, people coming out of high school, they would all know what Gulliver's Travels is, and this would not be an obscure reference. Today, because of the shift in educational policy away from knowledge and over to skills, this is a more obscure literary reference. So literary references are, first of all, incredibly cultural, meaning you would read Gulliver's Travels if you're going to read it in an English school, in an American school, but you may not read it, for example, in a Korean school, or you may not read it in, a Ukrainian school. And so you have to be aware of that. I think that is more acute in New York than it is in other parts of the country. For example, in Texas, I can be reasonably assured that all of my judges were born and raised, not just in Texas, but in the county that I'm practicing in. And so it's easier to get shared references because there isn't a lot of population shift. Now that's changing. Even in Texas, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, those are places that used to be incredibly parochial and insular, and they're not anymore. And that's because, of course, it's too expensive to live in New York, and so everybody's going someplace else. As people go from the Northeast into these other places, particularly along the Southeast coast, and I know a lot of New Yorkers are moving to Texas, which baffles me, but okay. That's going to become more of a problem in law practice there. You're not going to be able to be as successful being purely regional. So in New York, I think it's less of a problem because people are more aware of their audience. They're more aware of the diversity of their audience and less likely to try a reference that might be obscure. You're more likely to settle on something that's a little bit more common. Joan.
I thought it was interesting that the judge actually explained the whole thing. He kind of went into the wispy wires, the Lilliputians. So he's not just giving a quick metaphor. He's explaining the metaphor.
He did. He extended the metaphor. It's not that he said, here's what happened in Gulliver and here's what happened, but he said, this is like the wispy. So he sort of extended the metaphor through the description of what was going on, which I think makes it more helpful. Yeah, absolutely. It definitely makes it more helpful. And I think to the extent that you can weave those metaphors, to extend those metaphors through the description, I think it makes them a little more helpful. That's also something that we talked about yesterday and last Wednesday that made metaphors more successful. That when they didn't feel explained, and yet they were woven through in a way that made them more helpful. Okay. Any other comments or questions about that one? Okay. So the next one is 11.5. So everybody take a minute and read 11.5, and then they're going to walk us through. 11.5, and then they'll walk us through it. Okay, so somebody in that group, share with us your analysis. What is the comparison?
It is to Sherlock Holmes' book, and in that book there was a theory of a dog that did not bark, and nobody knew what that was, so we all had to look it up. And
Listen, I'm delighted you looked it up. I have to tell you, you're the first class that's ever done it, and you're the third class I've had go through this exercise. And in the 2 previous classes, they were just like, yeah, we knew what that was. And I was like, Google, hello.
So the theory, just real briefly, is that there was some sort of crime, and Sherlock Holmes, I think, said, hey, listen, the dog didn't bark at the nighttime, so that means that the intruder, or the person who was coming near the dog had to recognize the dog, the intruder, I think. Yeah, so it says, absence of barking is the turning point of the case. The dog must have known the intruder, otherwise it would have made a fuss. So, relating that back, so the respondents are relying on things that were unsaid in the statute and in the committee notes. And we took it and said, where it said that it would be a strange canyon of statutory construction, it would require Congress to state in committee reports or elsewhere in its deliberation, in which is obvious on the face of the statute. The court's responding with, in ascertaining the meaning of a statute, a court cannot, in the manner of Sherlock Holmes, pursue the theory of a dog that did not bark.
Okay.
So it's a metaphor, obviously. And then what was the other questions?
So it is a metaphor. It's not a literal comparison. There's no dog not barking in Congress. So it's a, the next one is, the next question is it non-thematic?
I don't think it's non-thematic. Or no, I think it is non-thematic, sorry. Why? Does anybody from my group want to help?
Remember, a thematic metaphor is a metaphor that helps us understand the entire case or the entire issue. A thematic metaphor or a theme of a literary work would be the major point of the work or the major theme or lesson of the work.
Yeah, so I don't think it describes the theme. I think it describes maybe a reasoning why the court should or shouldn't look at the statute in a certain way.
Right. So it's non-thematic in that it's not the main point of the court's opinion, and neither is it the main point of the Silver Blaze. What do you guys think about whether it was effective or not?
I didn't think it was effective at all.
Okay, why not?
Because like you said, like when we first read it, we were kind of both like what are they even saying with this? I never heard that saying in my life, so we had to Google it. And I feel like even when we Googled it, it was like even that was kind of tough to find out exactly why. Like I had to go like 5 different Googles, you know, just to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't think if you're familiar with Sherlock Holmes, you definitely won't get it. Like obviously you know who he is, but that was about it. And then I just don't think it was a good analogy for the other parts of the whole thing, just because I feel like it only hit one point. So I felt like you couldn't go whole and whole with it, where it only addressed one of the points being addressed.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know. I just thought it was an awkward fit.
Okay, so you thought for 2 reasons. You thought the first one was that you felt like it was an obscure reference.
Yeah.
And the second, that it was a forced metaphor.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like he just like needed to throw a metaphor in there, so he just jammed it in there. I don't know.
Yeah, this is absolutely a forced metaphor. And forced metaphors are obviously harder to follow. And we talked a lot about that yesterday, about some metaphors that you guys were using. The ones that didn't work, we talked about the fact that maybe it was being forced someplace, and maybe if you reworked the metaphor, it would work a little bit more smoothly. This one is forced in that the problem is Congress didn't say anything about the court. The court's point is there's an absence of legislative history because the language is plain. So there's no evidence because it's obvious, right? there's no need to explain because the language is clear. The dog that didn't bark because he was not alarmed. And so, like, you can kind of see a similarity, like
I felt like the whole time we were trying to like find pieces to the puzzle.
right.
Usually when you read a metaphor, it kind of clicks right away, like, oh, I get it now.
Right.
This was like we were trying to break it down, then break down what piece fit where.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the problem is that it's forced. And so it's really hard to figure out. So the dog that doesn't bark, sort of that idea is of there's no need to sound an alarm. And this other is there's no explanation because it's clear. So you can see that they're sort of related, but they're not the same in a way that a metaphor should be. Sean's absolutely right that what should happen is the metaphor should clarify the point. You shouldn't need the point to reverse engineer the metaphor. And so it is a forced metaphor. So that one's not great for a couple of reasons. Okay, moving on to 11.6. Take a second and read that one. Okay, so the groups that covered 11.6. Somebody walk us through that one.
Okay, for the actual metaphor, they're referring to the Goldilocks story, the story of Goldilocks. I got to say, I've heard of the story, but we had to Google it again to see exactly what the story was actually about. Goldilocks in this particular example would be the court. Mm-hmm. In the story of Goldilocks, she tried 3 types of porridge. She liked the one that was perfect for her. So one was too hot, one was too cold, and even with the seats, she tried three different seats until she found the actual seat that she liked. It's non-thematic because the story of Goldilocks is not the main point of this particular issue. And we were a little bit confused about the main point of Goldilocks because she wakes up and then she just runs out the house and that was it. But we're pretty sure that that's not the main point of this particular one. So that's why we said that it was non-thematic.
Okay. And obviously it's metaphoric because he's not literally testing porridge, chairs, and beds.
Yes.
Right? And it's non-thematic and it is a comparison. What did you guys think about whether it was effective or not? Loretta, go ahead.
Well, I thought it was effective, but then again, I know the Goldilocks story. And I thought it was effective because the defendants wanted the reviewing court to really take the time to find the exact right sanction that was going to make them happy instead of just taking whatever the court decided. Mm-hmm. So I think that was effective. They didn't want, it wasn't going to be too hot, hard, or too soft, but just right for them.
Okay. Jackie?
I also thought it was effective, but just in part because I understood the reason, like I understood the comparison that the writer was trying to make as far as making you feel as though the Goldilocks comparison is negative. I just was confused when the teeth imagery was brought up because I felt like that kind of painted a negative light towards the writer because you think of the comparison that you want is that the little girl and the other party is being flighty and they're not able to make a decisive choice, where the writer wants to portray themselves as, we're doing the right thing, we're being the aggressor in the positive light. But with the teeth story, it kind of just makes you think of the little girl getting attacked by the bear. So that was where I was like, maybe they're mixing a little bit. But it was like I followed them at the beginning, and then I just got lost towards the end.
Okay. Nikki?
I actually had the same thought, and it was helpful to have Jackie in our group because she has a writing background. But I thought it didn't really work for me. I thought, I get what they were saying with Goldilocks, and I know the story, but I thought the mixed metaphor with the teeth kind of just threw it out the window, and it just didn't make that much sense to me. I mean, I get that they were saying that, you know, like one was a negative portrayal for the defendant, just kind of being like lackadaisical on it and wishy-washy, and that the teeth is supposed to be like, you know, stern and harsh or whatever, but I didn't feel like they fit. And also I was thinking that, it was like, is it more of a simile because it's got like in there, or no?
It is. Yeah, it is a simile because it's got like. Yeah, which is fine. I mean, when we talk about metaphor in terms of persuasion, we're talking broadly about both metaphors and similes. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with similes.
Right.
Loretta.
I'm confused. Is that what we call a mixed metaphor? Because then, you know, Jackie and Nikki said about the teeth part.
It's not a mixed metaphor. What the court is saying, and clearly it didn't work for you guys. What the court is saying is, we don't want to be Goldilocks. We want to be the bear. So we don't want to come in and evaluate what's too soft. We want to come in after that decision has been made and let you know whether that's okay with us. So we want to be the bear. And so maybe if they had said, we want to be the bear, not the girl, like maybe that would make more sense.
So then it didn't work.
So I think maybe using the teeth as a metaphor for the bear, which was a metaphor for sanctions, was too far back. It was kind of metaphor on top of metaphor. So maybe if they had said bear instead of saying teeth as a metaphor for bear, I think that might have worked a little bit better.
Yeah, I think the way it was, it's almost like you have to search for it. Like,
and what's funny is when I read it the first time, I thought it was a mixed metaphor because I thought the teeth referred to the big bad wolf.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing too.
Yeah,
and so I was like, wait a minute, there's no big bad wolf in Goldilocks. So
I wasn't really even sure what the heck they were talking about at first.
I think the teeth, I don't think the teeth worked as well.
I didn't love it.
Yeah. Now, I think the Goldilocks thing, I felt like the Goldilocks thing was effective. That sort of...
Yeah, that's what I did too.
We're not playing with each option and we're going to let you know, you just tell us what you're going to do and then we'll come in at the end. Lorraine.
I mean, I get what you're saying about the big bad wolf, but I thought it worked for me because you have to be you just can't go up and pet a bear, and you can't go and sit in a bear's seat, and you can't go eat a bear's food, and you can't go, sleep in a bear's den, without the bear gonna attack you.
Right.
So, and then maybe claw. Maybe the claw would be. I don't know, but I mean, isn't the whole point of what they're trying to say too is that let's listen to the district court, because isn't the district court always overturned, always overlooked, always everything else, and it's always on appeal, like no one gives any credence to the district courts, in my opinion, as I see this.
Yeah, I think, that is what they're saying. They're saying, look, no, we're not going to, you don't appeal everything until you get us to give you the answer that you want. You have to listen to the district court. I think if the metaphor works for you, then it works for you. And I think the takeaway from that is that it was hit and miss. Like some people it worked, some people it didn't work. And for the people for whom it didn't work for a couple of different reasons that are actually kind of predictable. One is that the use of teeth seemed like it could have been a mixed metaphor, so there was a lack of shared understanding. or the teeth was just confusing because it wasn't clearly tied to the bear. So it looked sort of like so on the one hand, the problem could have been that it was a mixed metaphor, or it could have been that it was a stacked metaphor, but it wasn't clear what, it was just clear that there was a problem with teeth for some people. Jackie.
I was going to say that it's interesting that Lorraine says that, because originally the Goldilocks story was not a little girl with golden hair. It was a crone old lady that nobody was supposed to like. So you say, get rid of her because, and then they changed the story, and then you became more sympathetic to the Goldilocks, which is why I kind of read it that way, that I didn't know if I was supposed to take teeth positively or negatively.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Jim?
We were surprised that we all thought we knew Goldilocks, but we really didn't. So basically, you have to be very careful with these literary references, because even the things that you think you know, you yourself don't even know.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a whole category of, and there are articles that have been written, and I actually presented at a conference a few years ago on Bob Dylan in the law, about using Dylan lyrics. And there have been articles written, this wasn't my area for the conference, but there were several people who had written about the use of Dylan references in judicial opinions. And so song references are another one, and song references are incredibly cultural. So they've got to be really good. One thing, I'm going to let Marilyn make a comment. No. I think I'm going to say this first because Marilyn's memory is better than mine, and I'm going to forget this by the end. No, already forgot it. Okay, go ahead, Marilyn.
I was going to say that it didn't work for me. The main reason was because I found it a little condescending. I thought it was a little too lighthearted for what they were trying to say. Okay. Yeah, that's why it didn't work for me.
Yeah, and this is the thing. This is a metaphor that's used to express the court's frustration. Just like the metaphor for Gulliver's Travels was a metaphor used to express frustration. And anytime you're expressing negative emotion in a legal document, whether it's a judicial opinion or a brief, you just have to be really careful, because when you inject negative pathos into your document, you can expect a potentially negative response from your reader that sort of blows back at you as the writer. And so you have to really be careful about that. It can be offensive or insulting or seem a little bit, flip. The point I was going to make a second ago is that the one about the 11.5, the reference to the silver blaze and the dog that did not bark, to the extent that that one is successful, here's why I think it is successful, is because at the end it says, let me get the exact language. It says, in ascertaining the meaning of the statute, a court cannot, in the manner of Sherlock Holmes, pursue the theory of the dog that did not bark. Whether you know that reference or not, whether you know the work or not, you sort of get what the court's trying to say. We can't respond to a lack of information. Okay? So it sort of works in that even if you don't know the reference, and here's the thing, it works better if you don't know the reference. If you don't know the reference, the metaphor doesn't seem as forced, because both deal with a dog that doesn't bark and the Congress without legislative history. Those are both a lack of information. And so to some extent, it's less forced because it's more obscure. But if you know the reference, so if you don't know the reference, it's obscure, but it's not forced. If you know the reference, it's not obscure, but it is forced. So there's a problem either way, but it also works either way. Likewise, with the Gulliver's Travels, even if you didn't know Gulliver's Travels, that image of Gulliver bound by wispy multiple threads, you don't have to really know anything about Gulliver to know that being bound by wispy multiple threads sounds more irritating than it does threatening. And so to some extent they work. So to the extent that obscure references do work, It relies entirely on the fact that it's a very clear, relatable reference that might work absent the literary work at all. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. Any more questions about literary references? You are not required to inject a literary metaphor into your document. You are required to use a metaphor, but we've now spent a week and a half talking about different types of metaphors. So you have a lot to choose from. If you choose to use a literary metaphor as your metaphor, that's perfectly fine. It's the same analysis whether you use a literary, original, or established. Joan?
Does it have to be a thematic metaphor?
Yes, you have to have a thematic metaphor. Yeah, and you can also, most of you will have multiple non-thematic metaphors throughout the document. And I think Joan's submission yesterday was a great example of identifying the different non-thematic metaphors throughout the document. And so, so you'll want to note the non-thematic ones, but for sure you want to have a thematic metaphor. Randy.
Have you ever seen more than one type of metaphor in a brief that was actually successful? Or was
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. The trick is not overdoing it, but sort of, it's not unusual. In fact, every document has metaphors in it. If you go back and any court opinion you look at, any brief you look at, there will be metaphors, whether the author intended them or planted them. It's just how we speak. So you can have multiple types of metaphors and be very, very effective. It's funny because my kids laugh at me, and sometimes my students do too, because, when I'm asked to explain something that's abstract, I do it with metaphor all the time because I think metaphor is incredibly illuminating. And so, when I'm explaining something in class and a student says, well, and I've done it with you guys too, well, but I don't understand exactly what you're saying. And I'll say, well, it's like, and I'll give an example. And then if that doesn't work, I'll say, okay, well, it's like this. So the example that I gave you guys with Top Chef about eaters and cookers, or chefs and diners. How about that? That's a metaphor for authors and audience. And so, yeah, metaphor is a very useful part of legal analysis. And that's why we use the illustrative narrative. Remember, going back to that, is that basically what we're doing is we're comparing. Now there, we're making some literal comparisons. We're not making metaphoric comparisons. But using other things to compare to our case to illuminate the analysis or the conclusion, that's just what we do. That's what the law is based on. So you can definitely go overboard, but yeah, multiple metaphors are perfectly fine. That was a long answer to a very good short question. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to cover the last thing that we're going to talk about, which is visual persuasion. And then at the end, the last few minutes, I'll talk about what we're going to be doing on Wednesday, sorry. So you've got the two articles on visual persuasion and on formatting documents. And so what I want to do, and they're self-explanatory. They're not, this isn't intellectual heavy lifting. And those documents walk you through not just how to format a document effectively, but why that's effective, why it is that matters. And so if you haven't read them or had the chance to read them closely, you definitely want to do that before Thursday. And you'll definitely, obviously, want to do it before you complete your annotations, because I'm going to expect the formatting to be heavily annotated, just as the rest of the document, because for a lot of you, I suspect that your formatting will change. If you had me for Legal Process 2, your formatting is probably pretty close to what we're going to talk about already, because I cover this in Legal Process 2. But you're still going to need to annotate heavily. You're going to annotate just as heavily as someone who's changing their formatting, because you're not explaining changes, you're defending what you already had. So even if you've got this formatting, whether you had me or you didn't, you need to heavily annotate your formatting, and you're going to need to have read those articles to be able to do that correctly. Okay, so I'm going to go through a document and show you, and this one is posted for you, and you're going to want to make some notes, because this is a well-formatted document, but there are some things that would need to be changed for this one to be completely successful, okay? Now, the name of the game, there are a few basic principles with regard to formatting. The first one is that you're going to use white space and negative space to show the relationship between sections of the document and between the headings and the sections of the document. So you're going to use space to help you indicate relationships. Things that are closer together have a closer relationship, further apart have a more distant relationship. You're going to use font, both size and type, to differentiate between headings and text. You're also going to use font to differentiate between different levels of headings. So for example, if there's a hierarchy, like let's say the highest level headings would be obviously the section headings. So table of authorities, table of contents, statement of jurisdiction, statement of the case, like those headings are the highest level headings. And then within those, you might have subheadings. So for example, within the argument section, you might have multiple point headings. And so the point headings at the Roman numeral level should be smaller than the argument heading, but larger than the subheadings at the lower level, at the ABC. Okay? So your reader should be able to tell visually the hierarchical relationship between sections. Okay? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. In a minute, you'll see it in the document. The next principle, and this is another overarching principle, is that changing the shape of a word impedes the reader's ability to process it. So changing the shape of a word impedes your reader's ability to understand what you're writing. And so there's some very simple things you can do to avoid changing the shape of the word. First, do not use all caps. Now, I'm not an idiot. I know what goes on in practice, and I know that practitioners and judges love all caps. They use them all the time. They're not effective. They're not good. And to the extent that you have a choice, sometimes if you're working for somebody and they want you to do all caps, yeah, you want to do all caps. All caps is your very favorite thing. You don't love anything more than all caps. But when you have a choice about what to do, don't use all caps. It's not effective, and it slows the reader down. Now, there are some things that the reader doesn't read, that the reader just looks at and sees as an image. For those things, all caps are kind of fine, okay? So, for example, the word argument. We don't read the word argument as the section heading. We just kind of know what it looks like, and we know where it is. And you could actually call it, the monkey list. And your reader would still know that that's the argument because of where it is in the document. So it kind of doesn't matter if you fool around with that. So if you want to do your main headings in all caps, when you're in practice, not with me, when you're in practice, if you want to do your main headings in all caps, this really doesn't apply to that because people don't read those headings anyway. They know what the headings are supposed to say, and they don't pay that much attention, so it doesn't matter. For point headings, though, and this is a huge mistake I think practitioners make. In fact, I know. Point headings should never be in all caps because point headings are your persuasively worded statement about the theme of the section that follows. And the reader has to read and process that information. The reader doesn't already know what that says. And so you don't want to use all caps for that. So instead of using all caps, you use a larger font, you use bold. Okay? So anything that changes the shape of the word makes the words harder to read. Okay, Joan?
I was confused about using these. every word with a cap and the first letter capped in a sentence.
Yeah, so a lot of times people will use what's called title case, where every word is capitalized, but the rest of the word is lowercase. Title case has the same. It's not as bad a problem as all caps, but it presents the same problem as all caps. Okay, so you want to avoid title case as well. So sentence case is what you're going to use for point headings. They're a persuasively worded full statement, capital letter at the beginning, period at the end. I see a lot of them without periods at the end, period at the end, and just regular sentence case. Don't do title case, don't do all caps, because both of those impact the shape of the word. The next thing that you want to avoid is full justification. Full justification of the document stretches the words or compresses the words to make sure that the line extends exactly to the right edge. And so you want to avoid full justification. You want to use left justification. So don't use all caps. Don't use full justification. So that's one of the other principles, is that you don't want to change the shape of the word, because we read by word shapes. We don't read by, we don't sound things out anymore. At this level of reader that we all are, you no longer sound things out. You actually recognize the word by its shape, and so anything you do to change the shape of the word makes it harder for the reader to figure out which word it is, and it slows down the reader's process. Now, if you change the shape of a couple words, it's not going to kill the whole document, but if you change the shape overall by all caps or that full justification, that really slows the reader down. And again, the articles explain more about why that is, but you definitely want to avoid those things. Nikki.
I have my document left justified, but I actually did have my annotations in justification. Does it apply to the annotations too? I'm assuming yeah, because we don't want to slow you down.
It does, because you don't want to slow me down.
Right.
Oh,
okay.
Another thing, as long as we're talking about this, because since I just looked at your annotations a little while ago, if you guys would do me a favor, if you would, because there's no page limit on this, right? I don't care how long it is. Because you already know that more concise is more persuasive, so I don't have concerns that you're going to fill up unnecessarily. So I would like it to be in, bear with me on this, 14-point font. Some of your documents already are, because that's what the Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure require. So I'd like your document to be in 14-point font, and I would like your footnotes to be in 12-point. And the reason for that is that I, like many judges, have failing eyesight. And I can't see it all out of my right eye. It's completely decorative. So it really makes it very hard for me to read if it's not pretty large. Okay. So next thing. Oh, Nikki, yeah.
I'm sorry. Something else came to mind. So when I was revising and just looking at my annotated brief today, I realized that all the page numbers are off now because I've added all of this text at the bottom, for my table of contents and stuff. Do you want us to revise that accordingly as well, or are you just looking at annotations?
Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, so that's a great question. On your table of contents and your table, on your table, yeah. Don't redo those page numbers because I don't care. I'm not going to look those up.
Thanks.
I'm glad you asked me that because that's a pain. Okay, so let me show you guys what I mean. Oh, sorry, the last thing, and then I'll show you guys what I mean by some of these. The last thing is you want to prevent your reader's eye from jerking sideways, jerking up and down. When your eyes jerk, you lose processing ability in your brain. And so when your reader's eyes have to jerk hard across the page, hard down, up or down, your reader loses processing ability. So all of your headings should be on the left margin. The exception to this is the cover page. The cover page can be centered because it just needs to be pretty. But once you get into the document, table of contents, statement of case, argument, point headings, all of those need to be against the left margin. And the reason is when your reader's eyes have to jerk to the center of the page to read the heading and then back to the left margin, your reader loses processing ability at the very point where you're providing brand new information. And you don't want that to happen. Okay. Now, again, this is something where in practice, a lot of people prefer the centered headings. If your boss wants centered headings and your boss is paying you money to do them, absolutely. If your boss pays you to write the brief in crayon, you just need to know, is there a particular brand or color of crayon you prefer? But for the most effective document, the headings need to be against the left margin. And I can tell you, as somebody who reads a ton of documents, it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. Lorraine.
When you said you wanted the cover could be either way, it doesn't matter. You just want it to be pretty. That's subjective. Pretty could be as so simple as a little plain thing and not bold.
I'm about to show you a pretty page.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Okay, so let me show you a document that follows these for the most part. There are some places it doesn't, and I'll point them out, and you should make a note of that. Yeah, Randy.
My question is, are there books that we could probably get just for like standardized? Because I know that the blue book doesn't go as deep as what some of these requirements are.
No, I mean, hold on. So there is a book, you're going to be sorry you asked. It's called Typography for Lawyers. And it goes through all this stuff. I don't have you guys get this for the course because I feel like you get as much information as you need. Because a lot of this, like literally, there are pages and pages you can see of this book that just show you font types. So you can evaluate what font to use. So yeah, there are some resources that lawyers rely on. There's nothing like standardized rules beyond what the court rules provide. But the two articles that I give you are really good guides that talk about how to format documents. Yeah, does that answer your question? Okay. Okay, so looking at this document, this is generally speaking this is a perfectly fine cover page. It's perfectly fine. There's not a damn thing wrong with it. Now, the reason that I can't spit it out. The reason that the docket number is so large is because this is filed under Second Circuit rules, and the Second Circuit local rules require that the docket number be 1 inch high. And so that's why this is so big. I don't care what your docket number looks like. I understand that you're not all under Second Circuit rules, and it's fine. And even if you are under Second Circuit rules and you were in somebody else's class, they might not have had you follow the local rules. And so I'm not as concerned about that. What I'm concerned about is that your cover page generally has the correct information. If you were in a fictional circuit, or not a fictional circuit, if you were in a fictional court that's not under the federal rules, or you were in a state court, I understand that your cover page may look a little bit different. But what I want is a nicely legible cover page. Now, what I'm looking for is Is the title of the document prominently displayed? And the one here is perfectly fine. Generally speaking, I would prefer that this center part, starting with in the United States Courts of Appeals for the Second Circuit, all the way down to on appeal from the United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York, also be in an Arial or sans serifed font, just as this title is. Because the two most important pieces of information on this page are where the court, or which court is deciding the case, the name of the case, where it came from, and what the title of the document is. Those are really important pieces of information, and so you can emphasize those by putting them in an Arial font. And then the way this has bolded just the case name and the document title, that's great, because those of the important pieces of information, those are the two most important pieces of the 4 pieces of information. Yeah, Nikki.
Are we using our exam number or our name for this?
Names. Yeah, there's no way for this to be anonymous. I know what all your problems are. And some of you there are some of you that, like, there's only one of you, Nikki, using your problem, and there's only one person who has Loretta's problem. So there's no way for it to be anonymous. Any attempt would be a complete ruse, because some of you, couldn't be anonymous. Okay, this table of contents is good, except for a couple of things. One, this heading should be over to the left side. Table of contents should be over to the left side. Next, these point headings that are over one line should be single spaced. So this one should be single spaced right after point 1. This B should be single spaced. This D should be single spaced. Anything over one line in your table of contents should be single spaced. Otherwise, it's beautiful. Okay. I'm gonna show you the whole document, even though you guys aren't doing the whole document. Table of contents, just like I said, should be over to the left, because, oh wait, sorry, I already did table of contents. Hold on. Yeah, Ken.
So if we edit our table of contents, do you want us to put like footnotes and everything, annotations for that also?
Yep. Yep. And one thing you may have to do, you may have to not use the table of contents feature if you do that, because when you use the table of contents feature and it generates it for you, you can't put a footnote within the table of contents. And so you may have to retype that or figure out another way to make that work. Although footnotes may be different. Footnotes may work, but I kind of think they don't. Again, this is a beautiful table of authorities. Preliminary statement, this is not something that you'll turn in, and some documents have it and some don't. Second Circuit doesn't use this anymore. Again, this should be over to the left. Statement of jurisdiction should be over to the left. Statement of issues should be over to the left. Statement of the case should be over to the left. Statement of the facts should be over to the left. Now, here's one thing that this does that you definitely want to do. Remember I said you want to avoid anything that causes eye jerks. One of the things that causes eye jerks is an indented first line of the paragraph. So rather than indent the first line of the paragraph, you're going to put a space between the paragraphs to indicate the break, okay? Normally, I think what most of us are accustomed to is the first line indent to indicate the paragraph break. And so this is another solution to indicate the paragraph break without causing that eye jerk at the very beginning of the paragraph, okay? So that's another thing that you want to do. You want to put a space between your paragraphs, no indentation on the first line. Summary of argument, this should be up against the margin. Standard of review up against the margin. Okay. All of this should be up against the margin. Okay. One thing to watch out for. Notice that there are 3 levels of heading here. There's the main level that's argument. There's a sub-level that's the Roman 1 of the argument, and then a sub of that is a sub of the Roman numeral 1. These should all be formatted somewhat differently so that the hierarchy is clear. So ideally, this heading that says argument, if you have a 14-point font overall, your main document headings should have a slightly larger font. So that should be 15 or 16. By making that 15 or 16, you immediately make obvious that this one at Roman numeral 1 at 14 is subordinate. Okay, so then you don't have to do anything to Roman numeral 1, except obviously they all need to be against the left side of the margin. Then you're going to take you're going to take section A, you're going to leave it the same size, but you're going to make it Arial narrow. There's a font called Arial narrow. It's the same size as Arial, but it's slightly compressed horizontally. And so it looks like a smaller font, but it's not actually a smaller font, it's just a more compressed font. When you make the argument heading larger and the A section compressed, you can see immediately that 1 is subordinate to argument and A is subordinate to 1. And so you give visual cues about your organization that are easy for the reader to follow. So this is the one that's probably going to take really the most of your paying attention to since you're doing the full argument section. So you want to make sure that you do that. Okay. Greg Greiner wants to know what's up. Where is Greg? Okay, no clue. Okay, so there's that. And you can see throughout, okay, so this B would be formatted just like the A. It'd be Arial narrow, it'd be up against the right, up against the left margin. So you see how easy it is to see the paragraph breaks here with just the space between them. C would be Arial narrow up against that left margin. Same with D, Arial narrow up against the left margin. 2 would be just the same exact font that it is now, just up against the left margin. And then here, this conclusion, because we changed the argument heading to a 15 or a 16 point and moved it up against the left margin, we're going to do the same with all the other headings. Conclusion, certificate of compliance, certificate of service, although you don't need those things. I don't think I said you needed those things. And the table of contents, any other section, statement of the case, those are all going to be, you're going to make them the same font as you made the word argument and put them all up against the left margin. Okay. Notice also that throughout this document, just as the article talks about, you see that all of the headings are in a sans serif font, meaning without those little wings at the end of each line, and that the text is in a serif font. And so you want to maintain that. You want sans serif font on your headings, and you want a serif font on your text. Now, it doesn't really matter what serif font you use. This is Times New Roman, and that's a perfectly acceptable one. If you want to use a different one, that's fine, as long as you use the same one throughout all the sections of the document. Likewise, you don't have to use Arial. You can use something else as long as you use it throughout the document. The reason I like Arial is because that lets you use Arial narrow with it to show subsections. And when I have a document with subsections, I like to use Arial narrow so that I don't have to change the shape of the word or the size of the font to show subordination. When I have a shorter document where I don't have those subsections, I may use a different combination of the serif and sans serif font. So whatever you want to do is actually fine, as long as you show subordination. What you don't want to do to show subordination, unless you absolutely have to, is italics. You don't want to do italics because italics changes slightly the shape of the word by pushing it over to the side. So you don't want to do that. All righty. Any questions? Yeah, Joan.
You said Arial for the body of the text or for the headers?
Arial for the heading.
Okay.
Now I know, Joan. I think you've done it flipped. I think you have serifed for your headings and sans serif. You can do that too. You can flip it. I like to give very clear, concrete instructions without too many choices when I can, because when I give too many choices and you're just learning a concept, it can be a little bit overwhelming. The important thing is that you use serif for one and sans serif for the other. The reason I give this particular combination is because this is what the federal rules require. If you're not under the federal rules, you actually can use serif for your headings and sans serif for your text, which is fine. But if you're under the federal rules, you have to use those. Marilyn.
This is in reference to the articles. Are we going to be doing double-sided printing?
You're not going to print anything. You're going to upload it. We're doing.
Upload, okay.
We're even greener than that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, you son.
How about font for footnote?
Footnote, it doesn't matter. Whatever you choose is fine as long as it's 12 point. Okay. So like I said, this document is posted on Twin if you want to look at it, and I've just given you all the modifications. If you have any questions, just let me know. Okay, so, and I apologize that we're over time. I'm going to get you out of here in just a minute. For Thursday, I want you to have prepared and have in a file ready to go, in a Word file, your document at whatever stage it is. But you're going to share your document with a partner, and you're going to get feedback on the document. And so that's what we're going to spend the entire class doing. We're going to play Advanced Persuasion Bingo. There will be prizes for Advanced Persuasion Bingo. And so what you'll all get, and I'll upload it at the beginning of class, you will all get a bingo card that has the techniques that we've talked about all semester on the bingo card. And whoever gets a bingo with their partner's document first wins the prizes. Okay, now obviously first bingo, it has to be verified, but you will get a prize for first bingo. And then your partner can share with you, for sure they can share with you the bingo card. They can scan it and email it to you. They can take a picture of it and email it to you. Or you guys can just, I can leave the classroom open and I can let you go into a breakout room and you guys can have a conversation when we're done after class is over and give each other feedback if you like. But you don't have to do that. Nicole.
Are we allowed to turn in a final draft of our paper before the partner work or only after the partner work?
Only after the part. I won't accept final drafts until after class on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah. And you really don't want to. You don't want to turn in a final draft before your partner work.
It's just that I have another class that's starting soon, so I'm a little worried about getting it in on time.
Yeah. You're free to ignore the feedback.
Okay.
Yeah. You can ignore the feedback and upload the document after class if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, that's up to you. Okay. Yeah, Ryan.
You keep saying Thursday.
I'm sorry, Wednesday. No, I'm sorry. That's very destabilizing with the semester we've had with the different holidays. Nikki.
I know we went over this a couple times, but I still feel like I don't really know the answer. For the sections that we have to turn in, I know that you mentioned something before about, you said if you change the table of contents, then you have to annotate the change. But if you don't make any changes to the table of contents, does that part also?
You still need to indicate why you formatted the way you did.
Okay, so that is included then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Okay, I know some of you have classes at 8:30 or at 8:20. Please feel free to go. The recording is going, and I'm happy to answer questions if you want to follow up with me afterwards, and I'll stay here for anyone who wants to stay and answer questions. Lorraine.
I was going to ask some questions, that's all.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm having a hard time with the statement of the case and the statement of the facts.
Okay.
Because my class had those two separate.
Right.
Can I just make it easier on myself and combine it and make it the statement of the case instead?
That's exactly what a statement of the case is, yeah.
Okay, so I don't even have to put in a statement of the facts and a statement of the case. I can just make it together.
You just put them all in one section, call it the statement of the case.
Okay, that helps me. Thank you.
You bet. Joan.
Now, just to make sure I understand correctly, the documents is our whole paper that we wrote for the second.
Just the sections that you're going to turn in for this class.
Which sections did we go over that?
We did a couple times, and I posted it online, but I can tell you again. You're going to turn in the cover page.
Yeah.
The table of contents.
Yeah.
The table of authorities.
Yeah.
The summary of argument.
Yeah.
The statement of case. And if you had a separate section called the statement of facts, the statement of facts, except for Lorraine, who's going to put them all in the statement of case. And then the argument section. You don't need the conclusion. You don't need the table of compliance. I mean, the certificate of compliance, the certificate of service. You don't need the standard of review. You don't need the statement of jurisdiction. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I knew this. Sorry.
You're very welcome. That's okay. That's okay. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, Lorraine. Her camera's frozen. Loretta, let me get yours first.
So when the
Okay, so
wait, Lorraine, hold on.
Jen.
Go ahead,
So
Lorraine.
can I?
Go ahead, Lorraine. No. When your heading is at the left margin.
Yes.
And you have more than one line, are you indenting the second and third line under the first line, or is it wrapping right back to the margin under the A?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So if it's like a Roman numeral 1 or an A, your line is going to wrap back under the beginning of the statement, not under the heading, not under the label, the 1 or the A. So if it says, if it starts with, Roman numeral 1, the district court erred, your second line is going to wrap under the word the, not under the 1.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Lorraine?
When I do the case, like on appeal or whatever, okay, so the judge ruled, then they appealed for a motion to dismiss or whatever, or summary judgment or whatever. What kind of annotation do you want with that? Substantive? Or do I not have to? I'm having a hard time with stating the procedure as far as how do I annotate that?
You only annotate, like, if you did something, if you wrote something in the procedural history to try to be persuasive,
oh, okay,
you will annotate that.
But normally that doesn't happen, right? Because it's the way it is, and that's how it
I mean,
is,
you
right?
can provide more or less detail on procedural history and make it persuasive. I mean, for example, there's some things that you don't need, strictly speaking, in the procedural history, but that you could include. So, for example, let's say you are appealing, let's say your client lost a motion to dismiss. No. Let's say your client won a motion to dismiss. So in your procedural history, you need to indicate that the petition was filed, an answer was filed, a motion to dismiss was filed, and it was granted, right? That's all you need to put in there.
Okay.
But you can put in there the basis for the order of dismissal. The court granted the motion to dismiss and ordered this suit dismissed because, and the reasons. Now that's not strictly speaking, it's not necessary. It's also not, it's not irrelevant. It's just not necessary.
Okay.
But you would want that in there. Whereas if you lost the motion to dismiss, you're just going to say, defendants filed a motion to dismiss, which was granted.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet. Joan?
Mrs. Pocock made a note in my paper about the table of cases.
Uh-huh.
In some cases, there's multiple pages.
Yes.
Some case names are very long. And
Yes.
she mentioned that the case name intruded in the space of the page numbers.
Yes.
Do you prefer a second line for such long case names?
Yeah, so let me show
Serious?
you. Yeah, let me show you. This is generally, okay, here's the solution that I generally prefer. And that is, if one or more of the case names is really long, like here, you see down almost to the bottom, United States ex rel. Savory versus Lane.
Yep.
Like that's the longest one I have.
Yep.
It doesn't warrant changing the format of the whole page. However, if most of them were about that long, then what I might do is for every citation, and here's the thing, I don't like formatting it this way for some and not others. So my preference for uniformity is that you do it this way for all the cases or none of the cases. So if you have one or more long case names that you need to deal with that encroach on where the page numbers are, or if you have a lot of page numbers for that page and that's going to cause a problem, then what you want to do is with the volume number of the reporter, push that onto the next line and do that for every case. And so then you have, it's very uniform and it looks very neat. So you've got case name on the top, all the rest of the information on the bottom, dot leaders all the way to the end. And so the dot leaders and the page number are even with the second line of the citation.
Now on this page, when you look at 7 on top and 10 on the bottom, are they supposed to be formatted to the right?
They are supposed to be formatted to the right. And so if you use just the dot leader function in in Word, it will put them there. So yeah, it needs to be up against the right margin,
yep,
moving over to the left as you add more numbers. So I guess what I'm trying to say, not very artfully, is that the final number needs to be aligned, not the first number.
Thank you.
You bet. Any other questions? Okay. Fantastic. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
That's a good night.
Good night.